You're very welcome to the second senior thesis in creative writing reading. Culmination of 4 years of hard work, 4 years of hard labor, reading and writing for these 5 students. And we're here to help them mark the completion of their senior theses. Our readers today are Emily Lorena, Kylie Maddox, Kira Mason, Claire Quigley, and Jacob Tucker. First and foremost, I'd like to thank them, you guys, for all your hard work over the last few months and the last 4 years. I'd also like to thank their thesis advisors. Emily was advised by Lucy Ferris, who's joining us today from Paris. Kylie was advised by me. No, she's not really here. In spirit, she's joining us. Kira was advised by Michael Preston. Particular thanks to Michael, since he's in theatre and dance and he really didn't have to do this, but he agreed to do it. And Claire was advised by Ben Woodward, who again, since he's visiting us, really didn't have to do this. So thank you, Ben, for taking this on. Please show our readers the respect they deserve by staying for the whole event. We should have you out of here in an hour. Everybody's going to read for 10 minutes or so. You're also going to be treated to some theatre when Kira is doing her presentation. And the first reader will be Emily. So welcome, Emily.
Hello everyone. First just wanted to thank everyone for coming here on such a beautiful day to support us. This is a really great opportunity for us to showcase all the hard work that we've done this semester, and to also showcase what a great job the English department has done supporting us and making theses like these possible. So thank you guys for your amazing support these past 4 years. So I'm going to read to you a bit from a story from my first collection, which is called Lying and Other Fun Habits. The story is called The Bardo Situation, and it's a story told in the first person plural, taking place in a small New England town called Fieldbrook. I grew up in a town like this, and I was fascinated by the anonymity, the groupthink, and the possible gossip mill tendencies that were all characteristic in my town. Everyone knew everything about everyone, and everyone had something to say about that. So this story is about a family that's relatively new to town, is idolized by everyone else. They're good-looking, private, and according to the people of Fieldbrook, almost perfect. And then the rumors start, and it is revealed that Cecilia and Richard Bardo aren't as perfect as they seem. They're in an open relationship. This is extremely salacious and unheard of in this small conservative town. So my reading begins a few pages into my story, right when barista Rachel Douglas proposes that she saw Richard Bardo and his mistress get dropped off on a date by his wife. The people of Fieldbrook start circulating rumors that Richard Bardo is cheating on his wife, refusing and unable to believe that it could be anything more than that. By the end, they start to have to confront they have to start to face the reality of the Bardo situation. Jane and Philippa acted shocked by Rachel's news that she'd seen Cecilia drop off her husband and mistress on a date. They mocked it later with us. Jane Ryan told the book club, which met at the Main Street Cafe on Wednesday afternoons. The book club had a terrible propensity for gossip, since most of the club members usually didn't find the time to read any of the books and wanted to put off faking that they had for as long as they could. It was also, mostly, a huge rumor mill because of the fact that Jane Ryan was a member. The first person Philippa Costa told was her mailman, Bob Hackers. The mailman was well liked by everyone in the community, not just by Philippa. He was slightly heavy-set, balding, and he had a great smile. The combination of all of these characteristics tucked into a USPS uniform, well, that made him downright adorable. It was a challenge not to be his friend. The book club reacted to the news as expected, receptive to the idea of an affair, on the fence that it was with Janie Duxbury, and completely unbelieving that Cecilia knew anything about the two of them, let alone the idea that she was so dense that she could be persuaded into driving her husband and another woman onto one of their dates. Stranger was the reaction from Bob Hackers. Philippa told Jen Feinstein about how the mailman seemed personally offended by all the rumors that week in the Main Street Cafe. He goes to me, "Why would anyone believe that a woman like Cecilia Bardo would get cheated on? Richard has got more sense than that. Besides, they're a lovely family. Just leave it all alone. Leave it all alone? How are we supposed to leave a rumor like that alone? Yeah, Jen Feinstein took a big sip of coffee. She was between nursing shifts at the ER and had on scrubs with little pugs all over it. The pugs were also wearing little dog scrubs. She yawned. Maybe he has a crush on Cecilia. Philippa laughed. Well, I think everyone in town has a crush on Cecilia. The woman has the best fashion sense. Her makeup is always perfect, and I don't think I've ever seen a hair out of place on her head. Of course, little Hackers idolizes her too, but that doesn't mean I don't think this whole thing is weird. He was downright defensive. Jen Feinstein hummed. I think the weirdest part is that out of everyone in town, it's little saleswoman Jeannie Duxbury that gets to be in bed with Richard Bardo. Ah yes, Jeannie Duxbury, the alleged mistress. It was weird, and it made some of us mad. Sure, we were intrigued, captivating, watching the potential destruction of such an elegant and grandiose couple. We were not as eager to watch Jeannie Duxbury be the reason for its downfall. Sure, some of us don't like others, and it was usually for silly reasons, like their daughter got more playing time on the softball team, or because they were sitting in our seat at the cafe. But for the most part, everyone got along with just about everyone in town, or at least made an effort to. Jeannie Duxbury, however, was the one person universally disliked by all of us. It was the truth, and while we might have been prone to gossip, we weren't senselessly malicious. There were reasons why we couldn't stand Jeannie Duxbury. For starters, her obnoxious, bright pink Mary Kay Cadillac. She was a beauty consultant for a company called Mary Kay, and we'd cringe when we saw that horrible car because we knew that it meant Jeannie Duxbury was near, and soon she'd start trying to sell us blush or mascara or something. And who wanted to be pigeonholed into a conversation about cosmetics for 15 minutes? The woman was always trying to sell us something, and for that we hated her. Worse, she was good at it. Most of us had such an awkward time saying no that we ended up buying something we didn't need just to finish the conversation. It was a vicious cycle, and even though we hated Jeannie Duxbury and her Mary Kay products, we couldn't stop buying them. The idea that a woman this annoying could be seen with someone like Richard Bardo? He was practically George Clooney in Fieldbrook, handsome, confident, and he had an equally beautiful wife and children at home. It infuriated us. We became equal parts jealous, insecure, and patronizing. We suddenly cared way more about Cecilia than we ever had before. How could Jeannie do this to her? How could she do this to their marriage, their kids? This made Jeannie Duxbury go from being annoying to the devil. And, as always, after the initial news broke about the possible affair, more people started coming out of the woodwork to claim that they had evidence as well. One night, Jen Feinstein had gone on a date with her boyfriend to a movie theater in the town over. While there, she swore she saw Richard and Jeannie holding hands as they waited for popcorn. Grace Rogers said she'd spotted Richard's black BMW driving up Second Hill, far from his home in the new Holden developments, and suspiciously close to Jeannie's house. Philippa Costa swore that she saw them getting breakfast one Saturday morning. She said they were trying to hide, tucked all the way in the back corner of the diner. And then the rumors started to get weirder, like Jeffrey King's allegation, a lawyer in town who specialized in family law and had taken a particular interest in the Bardo storyline. He swore that he saw the two of them, Jeannie and Richard, steal a quick kiss after getting right out of a car in front of the Main Street Cafe. Come on, Jeffrey, in broad daylight, we'd said, in such a public place that all of us go to. He caught a lot of shit for that one, but more so because the rumor didn't end there. Apparently, according to Jeffrey, the car that Richard and Jeannie had gotten out of, it had another couple in the front seat. We all thought he was being ridiculous, but suddenly we were all remembering Rachel Douglas's story about Cecilia driving around Richard and Jeannie, and we were forced to give it a little more thought, just so, make sure we had our bases covered. When you saw them at the movies, Sarah Hill said, did they really look that cozy? Maybe this was all just one big coincidence. Maybe they like the same movies and they're people that like to go alone. These are big allegations after all. A few of us were sitting at the cafe for book club, and Cecilia had run in and left with the coffee about 5 minutes into the meeting. So naturally, we hadn't been able to move past the subject of the Bardos since. Sarah Hill, pregnant with her third child and an overall apprehensive person in general, was having a hard time getting on board with an affair at all. Next to Sarah, Jane Ryan rolled her eyes. That's a pretty big coincidence, don't you think? They looked extremely cozy, Jen Feinstein assured her. I remember looking at how they were acting, holding hands and cuddling in public like that, thinking not even my boyfriend holds me like that. who I'm supposed to be dating. It was kind of offensive. She paused for a moment. I also don't get it. Do we really think that Cecilia knows or would drive him around like Richard said? I mean, Jeffries even said he saw it too. God, I'd be so mad at the thought of Joseph looking at another woman. I don't know, Grace Ferguson interrupted. She was the youngest in the group and a dance instructor at a studio near the cafe. These dates are too out in the open. Cecilia is seen driving them around. You know, people used to do this in college. Sounds like they're in an open relationship to me. Do you think they all sleep together? Grace, yelled Jane Ryan. That's disgusting. You think all of them? Sarah asked. It was difficult to tell whether she was more mortified or curious. Derek, what do you think? You're a guy. We need a guy's opinion on this, said Jen Feinstein. Derek Moore was a tech assistant at the hospital. When Jen had found out he also majored in literature at college, she had invited him to join the book club. He and the old widow, Irene Hutchison, were the only ones who actually read the books, and he flushed when Jen asked his opinion. Well, I mean, I think it's hard to say, considering we don't know a lot. Jane Ryan snorted. Objectively speaking, though, Derek, would you find an open marriage sexy? I get disgusting, Jane Ryan cut in. Really, said Jen Feinstein. Sarah Hill was as red as a tomato. She sat at the end of the table, anxiously rubbing her pregnant belly. I agree with Derek. Maybe I wouldn't have done it, and I didn't do it. But I find the idea interesting, Irene Hutchison said. It was the first thing she'd said about the Bardo Situation since the group had started talking. Everyone sat in awe as she continued. An open relationship. Probably quite the trip.
So I'm bringing up some actors with me because I wrote a play, so they're going to help me with that. My play is called Insomniacs, and to give just a little bit of context, it's set in a pretty familiar liberal arts college setting, and it begins with a high-achieving student committing suicide and coming back to haunt other high-achieving students. And then things start to delve into the realm of fantasy, which is where I'm about to pick up towards the end of Act 1. So I'll introduce my characters the way they're described in the script. Going this way, we have Emery, the artist, Reese, the performer, Micah, the intellectual, Blair, the giver, and Ren, the achiever. Okay. Scene 8, music. Stage left, a counter painted to look like a piano and a plastic bag painted like a backpack on the floor. Emery sits at the piano with a laptop, humming, searching for the note on the piano, then looking back at the laptop. Reese enters, they exchange glances, then look away, then look back. It is awkward.
Forgot my backpack.
Emery nods.
Rehearsal went well today, sort of somber, but everyone was focused, so that's a plus.
I guess.
Arranging a new song?
Maybe, I don't know.
Well, what song is it?
It's a mashup.
Reese waits for Emery to elaborate. Emery doesn't.
How are you holding up?
Fine.
Sure?
Nope.
Awkward pause. They both start to say something. They stop. Another awkward pause.
Why are you lying to everyone about your friendship with Micah?
Wow, I don't know. Maybe I'd prefer to mourn alone.
And just to clarify, by mourn you mean medicate?
Jesus, Emery, is this really the right time to lecture me?
Isn't it? Micah is dead and you're headed towards a joint funeral.
Right, okay, and you're the picture of sanity, huh?
No, I'm not. Because I'm not a fucking picture. I'm a person. A real person.
What does that even mean?
Nothing. You know what people would say at your funeral? Reese was such a warm, energetic, cheerful friend and role model, full of so much life, love, passion, and they'll grieve for a person who never existed.
And what about you, Emery? You know the real me, right? Tell me, would you grieve at all?
You're already dead to me.
How long have you been planning that?
2 months, maybe 3.
Wow, long time.
Yeah, it fell a little flat, didn't it? Would have had way more zing a month ago.
I don't think the lack of zing is really a problem. Look, I could use a friend right now, and even though you won't admit it, you could too. Can you just please try to be friends?
Depends. Do you want a real friend, or do you want someone who will smile at you in rehearsal and improv stupid little bits with you and pretend everything is fine?
Would that really be so possible? I'm serious. Tell me it wasn't easy to slip into banter like that. Tell me it didn't feel nice.
Emery looks away.
Swallow your pride for 2 seconds, and you might find it a lot easier to get through.
Stop sabotaging relationships, and you might find it's a lot easier to get through life.
Reese is speechless for a moment, then laughs bitterly.
You're such a bitch.
You want to go there? You're so nice, Reese. So fucking nice. But if you think smiling at strangers makes up for treating the people who care about you like shit, you're an idiot.
I didn't want to hurt you, Emery. I was trying so hard not to.
No, I understand all the fucked up reasons you did what you did. And yeah, I even still care about you in spite of it all. But I refuse to play nice. I refuse to play any of your games or ride your crazy self-destructive roller coaster. And if that makes me a bitch, then fine. Yeah, I'm a bitch.
Lights flicker.
What was that?
I don't know.
Did you? No.
No.
Never mind. Well, that was a great talk. Hope your speech felt good.
It did.
Great.
Perfect. Are we done here?
Are you done?
Oh, I'm so done.
Great. I have work to do.
So do I.
Reese snatches backpack and exits. Emery returns to the piano. Scene 9, wine and pizza. Stage right, a messy twin bed slightly overlain with the projection of a neat one. Ren does crunches. There is a knock on the door. Ren ignores it, too focused. Blair enters, holding a box of pizza and a bottle of wine.
I ordered pizza.
Ren stops and stares at the pizza with slight disgust.
It won't kill you, I promise.
Are you sure about that? Because if it's Papa John's, honestly, all bets are off.
You are impossible.
Blair lays the pizza box open on the floor, moves around clutter to sit on the bed, and opens the bottle of wine, taking a swig straight from the bottle.
Ooh, straight from the bottle. Oh, out of 10 for class.
Yeah, well, it's been a long day.
No, I totally feel you. It was the longest day. I think it was an entire week in one day.
Years, I'm pretty sure I'm in my 30s now.
You've aged well, my friend.
Ren, I care about you and everything that's just happened. I'm worried that you know what, let's just skip that part. This thing that you're doing, what's it about? Because I am pretty sure it's more complicated than body image or control or a complicated relationship with food, so what is it? What's even going to do?
Wow. Bonus point for the new approach. I love how you totally combine your knowledge with this tough love, no nonsense tone that still recognizes and validates an internal struggle. You are going to be an incredible therapist someday.
Blair groans and takes a long swig of wine.
You are so frustrating, you know that? This whole thing just makes me so thirsty.
Oh, what? Wow. Think you like siblings, and I hope you're on the same page about...
No, God, no, we are on the same page. I don't know why I said that. I'm just literally very non-sexually thirsty right now.
Blair takes another huge swig of wine.
Are you trying to tell me that I'm driving you to drink?
No, this isn't helping. I need more.
Blair runs off stage, leaving Ren confused. Ren stares at the pizza intensely. Finally, Ren picks up a piece and takes one slow, tortured bite. Suddenly, Ren is devouring the pizza like a wild animal. Blair returns, chugging a bottle of water. They gape at each other.
Is it dry in here?
Definitely. My throat feels like sandpaper.
Yeah, no, my skin feels like it's going to crack off or shrivel up or whatever skin does when it dries.
Ren takes another piece of pizza and starts smearing the grease on his skin, then sees Blair staring and stops, curling the pizza into a ball and shoving it in his mouth. Ren speaks with a full mouth.
I don't know what's happening.
Well, when was the last time you had pizza? Or any food at all?
I don't know if that's what it is.
Of course that's what it is.
Oh, maybe don't tell me what I'm experiencing, okay?
Blair finishes the water bottle.
Yeah, this isn't working. I must be getting sick.
Gross. Don't get close to me. I high-key can't get sick right now.
Ren bites into another piece of pizza.
I need meat. Give me meat.
You're a vegetarian. Your blood must be so fresh and caffeinated.
Okay. Doesn't really answer my question.
What was your question?
I don't know. There's so much flesh on your bones.
So many fangs under your skin.
I need...
Blair and Ren lunge at each other and start making out in a violent, clumsy way. Blair bites Ren's neck and sucks. Ren pulls away and bites into Blair's shoulder. Blair struggles to get back to Ren's neck. Ren pushes Blair off.
What the?
Fuck.
Scene 10, vomit. Stage right. The bed is now draped with a reflective blanket. Reese kneels on the floor, hugging a metal trash can. There is a knock on the door. Reese pulls the trigger and vomits. Micah enters hesitantly.
Sorry, I didn't mean to. Are you sick?
Are you serious?
Micah stares wide-eyed at Reese.
Stop haunting me.
Sorry.
Micah turns away.
Sorry, that was me. I just need to be alone right now, okay?
Yeah, of course.
Reese turns back to the trash can, then looks back at Micah.
What are you still doing here? You leave and then you...
Know myself? Yeah, this isn't a flashback. Come on. Now, this is a flashback.
Lights flicker. Micah pulls Reese up onto the bed and they sit next to each other.
What are you still doing up?
I don't sleep much. I've never turned my clocks off. Do you have someone turn your clocks off?
Nah, I'm just a night person. And also a morning person.
I don't think that's a thing.
Shit. So what kind of thoughts keep you awake?
What thoughts don't keep me? Equations I haven't solved yet, the ones I invented, black holes, alternate dimensions, things I wish people would see in me, things I wish you could see out there.
Why don't you just say them? What's the worst that could happen?
No one would listen.
Reese stares at Micah, confused.
Reese, you have such a strong presence, and I fade into the background and I'm not really there at all.
That's not true. You're one of the smartest people here and one of the few who might actually leave a mark.
And my mark would be a list of achievements and awards, not a person. And say I don't leave behind those things, then I'm just nothing at all.
Sounds kind of peaceful. That's basically what Nirvana is, right?
Not quite.
Well,
Reese pauses, then puts on a cheesy grin and jokes.
you want identities? I've got plenty.
Micah forces a laugh. Micah begins to actually laugh with a sort of sinister hysteria.
Like, are you okay?
No, I'm not okay. I'm dead, asshole.
This isn't you. You're gentle.
And miserable. And you pushed me away and brushed off my pain with stupid jokes.
I was trying to cheer you up. I thought it was helping.
How many times have you told yourself that today? Believe it yet?
Reese is speechless.
You're so good at lying to yourself. It's fine. Maybe if I had your talent for self-deception, I'd still be here. Nothing wrong with being in the business of self-motivation. Though your methods are questionable.
Can you just say what you came here to say?
I could, but the words would be much more valuable from you.
Fine. I wasn't there for you when you needed me, or in the way that you needed me, and now you're dead. And I blame myself for that. Is that what you wanted me to say?
I'm not here to play the blame game. I just want you to be honest.
I know I should tell people we were friends. It's not that I'm embarrassed or anything.
Well, I didn't think you were. Now I'm starting to.
I just feel guilty.
Why?
I told you I wasn't there for you.
And why weren't you?
I missed the signs, I guess. I didn't understand how serious.
Wrong?
I wasn't looking for the signs because I was too wrapped up in my own shit.
No, but getting warmer.
Fine. I noticed the signs and I brushed them off, but I never actually.
I don't think you're giving her imagination enough
I
credit.
didn't know.
Of course you knew. Because you know, you get it. And that's why you let me turn into a ghost right in front of you. Isn't it?
Pause. Reese looks away.
You could risk showing me what you really are, not even to save me.
When I
You are.
don't want to play this game anymore.
The game's just getting started.
Reese gets up and turns away from Micah.
Go on, turn your back on me again. Stare at the full moon and tell Amy something. Doesn't matter. I can still see what a monster you are. And the moon can make everyone see.
Reese howls in pain. Micah grins. Reese turns back in horror and sinks down, contorting in anguish around the trash can. Reese vomits violently.
Enjoy being both a night creature and a morning person.
Micah exits, leaving Reese writhing on the floor. Blackout. Thank you.
All right, so before I start, I want to thank Professor Barry for being there throughout my 4 years here. I remember being like so scared of you my freshman year in that first English class.
You're not?
You know, it's different now. But I think out of all the people here, you definitely know like my voice and my poetry probably just as well as I do at this point. So the first poem that I'm going to read, I think I wrote it like December of this year, so we were done with midterms, and I was celebrating my mom's 40th birthday in New York City. And so it's kind of just sort of marks the beginning of the process. Hung up at the Crosby. Over the lip of West 48th and 8th, teetering on the edge of a million errands, on the run, neglected and outdone, an unevenly strung Christmas tree, below a floor more books than living, and above that, clear window panes and no one home. The bulbs of the Brooklyn Bridge sit between rooftop and sky, unmoving like F. Scott Fitzgerald's frowning eye. Exhaustion hits my chest, pins my heart to the wall behind me, draws my shoulders back and towards the girl that doesn't know where you are, the girl who honestly believes she will never see you again. So this second poem is titled Mahina, and that is a Hawaiian word that means moon. And I think it was like when it was kind of like a thing to change your last name to your nickname on Facebook. And I hated my middle name, so I was like, oh, I'll go with this. Like, I love Hawaii. Like, this is what I'm going to be. And so my friends that actually know my last name either call me by that as a joke, or people who don't know me think that's my actual last name. Mahina. You wrote her an electric vibe. Silver minnows banding ribbons of flashing lights across the horizon line. And you, waiting in the numbing cold, waiting for your feet to move, or afraid of disturbing the scene in front of you. Her name whispered sounds of the moon. The buttered, clean face of the most beautiful girl stood naked and glowing in the corner of your dark room. You swayed from side to side, dancing around the shadow she cast beside herself, praying to God you'd do her justice. I was convinced you had written about me once. Pretty words scattered on a page like clumsy leaves tumbling across a barren ground, dry. Things that never reached your lips. Things that never reached me. Tides that never made it back to sea. And so this third one that I'm going to read, I think I sort of wrote about the California wildfires and sort of seeing that as sort of like a ghost or like a haunting thing. Listening to wildfires. Spread thin and sparse amidst the brush of your breath, words as embers push like perseverance over the slowing of Godspeed in my hands. The sky falls in a hush and moves past the gaps between my fingers and swirls at the bottom of the barrel in my lungs, making home and circling back. Possibility pushes into flame and goes surging up and over, consuming all that once was. The shrill of the wind tosses moments out of time and onto their backs, reeling for the reality they attach to themselves. Snaps of light illuminate life as what is lost in that instant. No path has ever been so invisible. No cloud of ash has ever resembled the exact shape of your face this clearly. I hear you all around me in screams of what I never said. And so this last poem that I'm going to read is called Spring. I thought it was fitting. But this is kind of sort of like a sense of relief that I was trying to articulate in my collection. Spring. Whatever it was, the wind set free to carry the truth, or the fact that it was 6 and still light outside, I didn't feel your weight anymore. Like a rainy fall spent walking on wet leaves so carefully, and then the discovery of dry, chalky pavement, or like the wrinkles of grandma's hands as they caress your cheeks hello. My beauty spills upon this release. My stride is stretched, my footsteps heavy, the okay me, the so great me, the one that doesn't care, does not dare go back. And yet, the way your laugh cuts into me so easily, the rower's paddle dipped down and carving into the still water of a thick summer's lake, all of us laid in front of me like fallen leaves across its surface. Things the branches could not hold anymore, things that could no longer be held by me. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thank you for coming out. Thank you to the English department and Professor Woodard, who's advised me throughout this process. So my thesis was a collection of short stories, and today I'll be reading a full story for you, my first story, about a recluse named Francis, who has made the conscious decision to isolate himself from humanity and lives in a rent-controlled apartment which he inherited from his great-aunt Gertrude. Okay, so it's called At a Hermitage. Francis Hubert Mortimer opens his eyes to the phosphorescent stars on the ceiling above. He counts to 10, and the alarm clock on the nightstand beside him crackles to life. A study emerged yesterday claiming that approximately 80% of the ice atop Mount Kilimanjaro's glaciers will be melted in the next 5 to 6 months, Francis says, in accordance with NPR's morning brief. He decidedly turns down the volume by spinning the pointy little knob on his radio. This morning, for a change, Francis can do without the bleak, however brief, reminder of all the ways in which the vast world that he lives in has evolved into a steaming pile of dog shit. Francis inhales deeply through his nose and out with a whoosh, sending his breath to where his body is in need of some extra attention. Wiggling his toes, he points and flexes his feet. Francis listens closely for any new cracking sounds. His right ankle seems to pop 1 octave louder than usual. Noted. Francis eventually swings himself up to a seated position. He spreads his toes on the thick shag carpet covering every inch of his bedroom like a fresh layer of moss. While the shade of the carpet is downright offensive, Francis has grown accustomed to the way it feels beneath his dragging feet. Although most of the apartment's 1970s decor has been buried beneath the eclecticisms of its most recent tenant, the carpet persists. The plastic stars, pasted to the ceiling, begin to fade as morning light seeps in through the bedroom window. Sounds of the hot summer day outside climb up from the busy streets below. Francis assumes a position behind the thick brown curtains that drape over the sliding door of his balcony. He puts on a dust mask before peeking his head around the layers of fabric. The balcony is covered with avian fecal matter, and a peeling iron chair sits unaccompanied in the corner. On the railing hangs a bird feeder. Francis arms himself with an aluminum hook bar stored beside the curtains and slowly slides open the balcony door. Inching his way out, he manages to grab a hold of the feeder. The sun is blinding, fleeting yet blinding. Francis makes a concerted effort not to let his gaze linger on anything but the bird feeder. He can feel eyes on him coming from all directions. Francis hurries back inside and slams the door tightly behind him. The curtains follow. He takes a moment to catch his breath, leaning against the door, gripping the bird feeder in his sweaty palms. He thinks about who or what might have glimpsed him on the balcony. He thinks about the type of people occupying his same airspace. Perhaps there is a young boy sitting at the kitchen table in the luxurious 15 Central Park West. He's enjoying a bowl of vegan, gluten-free cereal before he heads off to private school with his driver. No one will believe his story of the stranger with a hook. But, as a precaution, Francis will be sure to never again replenish the bird feeder at 8:33 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Routine materializations into the public sphere are not worth the potential implications. The child across the way will inevitably forget about the robot with affection for pigeons living in 25 Central Park West, and will eventually grow into just another fully developed spawn of the 21st century. Reminding himself to order another bag of bird food, Francis turns on his heel, off to make the bed. Each of the 4 posts in either corner of the bed is fixed with round finial accents to add style and class without detracting from your comfort, Francis says, mimicking whomever it was that sold this gargantuan piece of furniture to his great-aunt Gertrude. Careful not to pull too hard on the sheets, he shimmies the plush duvet to a center position on the mattress. Is that a rip? He bends over to check the corners of the mattress, which he has safety pinned to the sheets, just in case. Pristine. He arranges the pillows in order from largest to smallest, back to front. He karate chops their middles for the optimal center crease. A rip? He gasps, bending over to check. Nope, all good. He smiles to himself. Once satisfied, Francis looks around the room for anything that may be out of place. The floor-to-ceiling bookshelf on the wall opposite the balcony is temporarily arranged by publication date. For the last several days, however, he's been grappling with an urge to browse his bedroom literature in order of author's last name. For now, he will leave it. Grabbing 1, 2, 3 Clorox wipes from within the chest at the foot of his bed, Francis wipes down all of the surfaces in his room. Taking the lamb wool extension industrial duster, leaning against the wall with its companion, the aluminum hook bar, Francis reaches up to the top of his bookshelf, the corners of his ceiling, and over the 43-inch LG LED screen mounted to the wall across from his bed, all while humming to the tune of Steely Dan's Do It Again. Francis wraps a thick white bathrobe around his wide frame in order to protect his modesty, though he is alone in the apartment, and heads to the kitchen to fix some breakfast. The warm smell of coffee, set to brew at 8:45 every morning, leads him through the apartment's narrow corridors. In the front foyer, Francis switches on a record player. This week, the theme is 70s classics. He fingers through albums in a milk crate labeled with the according decade, singing the alphabet out loud until he arrives at Santana. Francis pulls the vinyl out with extreme care and says with an approving click of his tongue, Abraxas, noun, an ancient charm of the late Greco-Roman world linked with both Gnostic beliefs and magical practices. In the kitchen, Francis flicks on the overhead fluorescent light bulb. The cabinets in the narrow kitchen are in a costing shade of robin's egg blue, staying consistent with the theme of Aunt Gertrude's achromatopsia. The white porcelain countertops are cracked where they meet the tile backsplash, presumably from years of disuse. A stainless steel coffee maker sits next to a rusty old toaster that refuses to quit. There is a small window over the sink offering a view of the adjacent building's concrete backside. Francis has never opened the window but faithfully tends to the small succulents lining its sill. There is an old telephone mounted on the wall next to the doorway and a small table in the corner. Like his bedroom, the kitchen remains spotless. Francis pours himself a piping hot cup of French roast and reaches into a drawer for his favorite pair of plastic orange scissors. With the utmost precision, he snips across the tops of 5 Splenda packets and creates a delightful cascade of white crystals leaping into the brown abyss below. He toasts 2 English muffins. One he garnishes with crunchy peanut butter, banana slices, and a sprinkle of flaxseed. The other with butter and jam. Tomorrow, it will be the same. Swooping up his breakfast, Francis matches his steps to the guitar strings that Santana plucks through the record in the foyer. He sprinkles a pinch of fluid fakes into the bowl of his goldfish Homer, his constant companion and confidant, serenading, and she's trying to make a devil out of me. The phone rings, and Francis's ebullience dissipates. This is the residence of Francis Hubert Mortimer, he answers. Yes, hello, Mr. Mortimer. This is Michael Charnas. I'm calling from the development team over at Riverdale Realty Trust. I believe my colleague spoke with you a few days ago regarding the new ownership of your building. Your belief is accurate. Covering the mouthpiece of the phone, Francis makes an exasperated face at Homer. Rolling his eyes, he says, "Can you believe this guy?" Right, well, Michael, I will say to you what I already said to your dim-witted colleague this past Friday afternoon at approximately 2:32 p.m. I know the precise acreage of this block and exactly how much Riverdale paid in its recent acquisition. I've calculated the taxes, insurance, and carrying costs of the empty properties. If, and only if, I ultimately agree to relocate, it will be on my terms. You will serve as my personal realtor in determining my next living quarters, and I will walk away with perhaps more, but certainly no less than the market price for this unit after its renovation. Finally, I refuse to entertain your negotiations until I am the last tenant remaining in this building. Yes, sir. Well, I'm afraid if that is all, Michael, my English muffins are getting cold. Francis hangs the phone back up on the wall. He's completely lying, of course. He knows how evictions work. He probably knows more about evictions than Michael's entire development team. But he can't bear the thought of stepping outside, of moving to a germ-filled apartment, of strangers with dirty hands placing his life in boxes and transporting them in grimy vehicles. The night before the great Gertrude Mortimer died peacefully in her sleep at her Santa Barbara estate, she penned brief instructions for her last will and testament onto a handkerchief. As for the New York properties, leave them all to Francine's grandson, the one who can't stand to be around any of us. That will cause a scene? Gertrude was right. Francis hadn't spoken to anyone in his family since he turned 18 and moved downtown. Consequently, plenty of people had plenty to say about his inheriting $457 million worth of New York real estate. Distant relatives, flanked by high-profile lawyers, were incessantly knocking on his old front door. New York Times reporters chased him down the street, back when he could still manage to walk down the street, eager to catch a picture of the black sheep of the Mortimer family. Francis made only one statement during the entire scandal, to a particularly domineering reporter. He said, "There may be some nice people in the world, you know. I just don't happen to be related to any of them." Francis wanted nothing to do with any of it, and eventually he wanted nothing to do with anyone. When Francis's phone rang with the 12th call from Gertrude's lawyer 7 years ago, he was reeling from another painfully awkward encounter with the pretty music teacher that lived in his building. He picked up the phone and said, "I'll take the smallest one." As he digs into his breakfast, brunch now, Francis reaches for his iPad. "Good morning, Francis. Here's the news tailored to your interests for today," greets Siri. Francis scrolls through this morning's news stories. Government shutdown enters its 26th consecutive day over President's veto of gun control bill following deadliest shooting in U.S. history. Francis shakes his head. A familiar feeling of despair originates in his stomach. More allegations of sexual assault have surfaced against Silicon Valley executive clique. Francis continues scrolling, searching desperately for some uplifting news. He wonders how people can even stand it out there. Francis eventually puts his dishes away and makes his way back to the bedroom. Switching on the 43-inch LG LED TV, he scrolls through the fitness channel, finally settling on a session of Zen yoga. He rolls out the yoga mat from underneath his bed and considers cracking open the sliding door to let in a breeze. Only a crack, though. He reaches for the door handle, and then changes his mind. Better to hoard his Zen from the turbulent world outside. After 30 minutes, Francis is feeling adequately energized. He hops in the master bathroom shower to get ready for work. He hops right back out 90 seconds later. He gives himself a precise shave. He dons a pair of crisp Dockers khakis. He shrugs into a white linen shirt. He always wears white. It complements his natural olive skin tone. He winks at himself in the mirror. "Have a good day, handsome." Grabbing his briefcase and a banana, Francis crosses the living room with a skip in his step. He whistles to the tune on the foyer's record player. It's still Santana, and the song is "Hope You're Feeling Better." He'll have memorized the lyrics as well as the note progression to all of the 70s classics by the end of the week. The living room features a large L-shaped couch adorned with Gertrude's throw pillows and crochet blankets. The modern slab of a coffee table is currently covered with a 4,000-piece jigsaw puzzle depicting Australia's Byron Bay. Francis reminds himself to order some more puzzles in bulk. Standing in the corner of the room are 4 large telescopes. The view from this room, Francis imagines, would be beautiful today. The sun is shining over Manhattan's Central Park, and the city is teeming with people ready to tackle their days. Or self-destruct. That's their problem. Francis's living room curtains remain shut. At the far end of the room is a set of French doors. Francis opens them to reveal a highly equipped home office. 2 computer monitors sit adjacent on a wide oak desk. A large-scale map of the globe decorates the wall beyond. "I'll never get sick of that commute," Francis grins to himself. Francis powers up and settles in just in time for his first class session to begin. One by one, faces from all over the world join his virtual classroom. Right then, that's everyone. Shall we begin? Our lesson today is on object-oriented programming and electrical engineering. 3 lectures later, Francis finally has a moment to breathe. He leans back in his large chair, taking a nice long overhead stretch. He really knocked his talk on applied mechanics out of the park. Every one of his students was clearly captivated. He could tell by the looks on their digital faces. He loves when he can feel their excitement about learning through the screen. A knock at the door sends Francis flying out of his seat. Who could possibly be at the door? Is it the realtors? They wouldn't come here, would they? They can't do that, can they? He wouldn't have said all that stuff if he had known they would show up here. His breath shortens. His lungs pump double time. He can't stop the sweat rolling down his face. Francis feels like he has no control over his own body. His anxiety has taken over. The tightness in his chest is rising up through his throat, choking him and crippling him. He feels like he's going to faint. He's hyperventilating as he racks his brain, sputtering, pacing across the living room. Is it his prescription delivery? No, that's not until tomorrow. No, he groans. Frantically pulling at the ends of his hair, he's walking in circles now. He tells himself to calm down. God, Francis, get it together. Wiping his palms on his pants, he makes his way towards the door. Francis is comforted by the sight of the triple bolt lock. They can't get in unless he lets them in. Careful not to make a sound, he peeks through the peephole. Christ, he breathes a sigh of relief. It's the delivery girl with his groceries. He recognizes her from her long braids and plastic-framed glasses. She wears a t-shirt that reads, "Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, sexist, not my POTUS." Francis almost laughs, but then she knocks again. Why is she knocking? Why is she lingering? His panic returns. Hi, so sorry to bother you, but I checked under the mat, like always, and there isn't a tip. He must have forgotten to put cash under the mat last night. Francis leans his head against his arm on the door. Such a stupid mistake, so unlike him. All he has to do now is open the door and hand this harmless young woman some cash. That's it, he tells himself, that's it. Can he slide it under the door? No, there's no room. Maybe he can just stick his hand out. She'll just grab it and leave. She doesn't want anything else from him. Or does she? How can he know for sure? Hello? He wants to open the door, just to know that he can. He reaches for the top bolt with his right hand. It's shaking uncontrollably. Francis has to remind himself to swallow the saliva building up in his mouth, but there's a lump in his throat. He touches the top bolt, then pulls back. Why is it so cold? Is it always that cold? Francis wipes his sweaty hand on his khakis, then reaches for the bolt again. He turns it slowly until it clicks out of place. Hey man, no offense, but like, I know you're in there. You kind of always are. Francis pauses with his hand on the second bolt. How does she know that? He starts to whimper. Turning around with his back against the door, he slumps to the ground. Francis sits there, listening, until her footsteps disappear down the hallway. He doesn't want to hate people, he just feels better when they're not around.
Hi, everybody. So I have a couple things to say. One, I have too many thank yous than I have time for, so all of you, you know who you are. So this originally was supposed to be a novella. Of course, it got a lot bigger than that when I was planning it. And so now my thesis was only the first quarter of the novel. And basically the small synopsis is that it's 1948 and a man goes on a cruise. And he figures out everything about himself. It's just after World War II, and he's a veteran, and that's pretty much where it is. When the book opens up, it opens up on him ready to commit suicide. Fortunately, one of his friends shows up and stops him from being able to do that, and he says, "You're gonna come on a cruise with me instead. It's going to save you." And so the section that I have picked is right after that, when my main character, Henry, is alone by himself. The rest of the evening was spent incapacitated next to the record player. A man should be honest about whether or not he cries. My father used to say that. And that night, I shed enough tears to fill the bottle of gin that I was draining twice over. Walking to the liquor store, I had seen a woman who, at passing glance, looked exactly like Diane. Of course, it wasn't, and now that I remember it, she didn't look much like Diane at all, but it was enough then to blow down the bit of stability I had that day. My mind was thrown into chaos, and I clung to the record player like a piece of driftwood in a tempest, and I held on as best I could. The liquor made the world spin, the memories made my heart race, but the music pulled me through. I fell asleep that night with the bottle of gin next to me, a spent record, and the rope draped over my knees. The next morning was treacherous in its own way. I woke filled with regret, as nights of drinking often lead to, but the sheets were heartbreakingly soft. Heartbreakingly soft. Days of Diane lying in bed and wishing she didn't have to go to work. Not that she didn't love her job at the Art Institute, but since the war had broken out, the visitors dwindled. We would lie there in the morning light and stare at each other with tired eyes, and she would beg me to never check the time. But clocks tick unwatched. "But these sheets are heartbreakingly soft," she protested, and some days it worked. I never understood exactly what made them quite so heartbreaking until I began waking up in them without her. Now I can't remember the last time the sheets didn't break my heart. Staring over at the clock that morning, I almost thought I was going to be late for work. Panic swept through my body and I tore myself away from the sheets and into the bathroom, only to realize leaning over the sink that there was no work to go to. There hadn't been for a month. Finding a stable income after the war proved to be difficult, not only for me, but most of us that returned from the fronts. I managed to pick up odd jobs in hotels and in some restaurants, but nowhere was permanent. They always had something kind to say, the typical line to give to veterans, "We feel you should focus on reacclimation," like I'd forgotten how to be a human being. I could work. When hell wasn't bursting forth, all we did was work when we weren't at war. Sure, I still jumped at loud crashes, and I had a habit of going on drunken streaks, but I could keep my temper, and I could work. But that didn't matter. When Diane got sick, I stopped going to work at all, and we lived off of what savings we had. The Art Institute gave me a job at the front desk for a few weeks out of sympathy for her death, but as of the week before now, leaning over the sink, we parted ways. It perhaps wasn't as mutual as it sounds. So I went back to bed. All day on Tuesday, the rope was set up and dangled over the stepladder waiting. The tickets came that day, just as Albert had promised, and I found myself both surprised and then reluctant to open them. Stuffed inside an envelope made of thick paper, the return address was to a bank in New York, whose name I cannot recall, where Albert apparently had a high position. I opened it warily, not entirely sure how he had sent the tickets so quickly, and found both tickets marked first class. A warmth rose in my cheeks. Like any child, I had thought we were rich until I found out that wasn't the truth. I found my mother crying once in private when $100 had been misplaced. There were very few times I had ever seen or held that amount of cash, and never could I have imagined using it for something like first class. Now I had first class tickets and someone else paid for it. Well, the idea of sending the tickets back and refusing Albert's offer had crossed my mind a few times, but it occurred to me that he was tossing me a line, that he knew I was stranded. He hadn't seen the rope, so had he seen it on my face, sensed it? It was pity. I was almost certain of that. But how low must one fall before realizing that pity is just goodness caked in mud? And truly, I was in no place to refuse him and say that I could manage this alone. The rope that moved around but never vanished tied my days together. I would wake up if the rope weren't already there in my lap and lay it out in front of me as I had coffee. When I went to sleep, the rope was not far from my side or my mind. In a way, it was comforting. It was my way out. When the liquor, the cigarettes, or the tears couldn't do anymore. There were times that I would sit next to the record player drinking myself blind and useless, and I would put the noose around my neck. Didn't hang from the ceiling, but it dangled around my neck like a tragic piece of tragic jewelry. I would feel it grow tighter as I became more worked up and breathing became more difficult, causing the burn of the alcohol in my throat to sting, and I would sometimes choke on my tears. So many thoughts, so many imagined scenarios, and all of them pointless. Never finished, dangling like loose ends, a dead shadow in the window. But I never did it. Death is so absolute, so final, and as much as I want to leave this world, the thought of everything I've ever known disappearing was too overwhelming at times. The music had a way of keeping me here. Every time I came to the gramophone, it would fill me with life and shadow of purpose. I needed the trumpets like I needed air, the pianos like I needed love, the drums like I needed joy, and all of these things would keep the silence at bay. The silence that would shout my name from the hallways. The silence that would stare at me through the window. I was haunted by silence. Everywhere. Silence that came to me seemingly by accident, only to force me to think about all the times I had so desperately wished for silence. The times the bullets clattered overhead and you found that you can sink deeper into the dirt than you ever thought before. One twitch, and you died. The times that explosions were wiping my fellow soldiers clean off the land next to me, one more mortar shell, and you were gone. Where was all this God-forsaken silence when the world let out nothing but bloody war cries? Because I hear nothing but fucking silence now. Nothing but quiet in the lonely hours, silence when someone speaks, noiseless when I ask God why. Those of us that had known noise, fantastic, dreadful noise, now know silence. And it was beginning to kill some of us off slowly, those of us the war had inexplicably spared.